And Mr. President, we're getting GDP numbers on Thursday. How worried should Americans be that we could be in a recession?
We're not going to be in a recession, in my view.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. We are living in some crazy times, guys. I'm telling you, we're living in some cuckoo for Cocoa Puff times that are extremely scary, because anytime the Democrat Party doesn't get their way, it seems like they try to bend reality, okay? They're trying to bend reality away from truth. And one of the ways to do that is by changing the definition of words. And recently, Merriam-Webster has gone woke and changed the definition of female by adding a secondary definition of female that defines the term as having a gender identity that is the opposite of male. Now, again, the problem here is that you have a dictionary that used to be reliable, okay? A reliable source of objective definitions of words that is capitulating to the woke mob, okay? Because the left, they used to say, at the very least before this change happened, that sex and gender were two different things, okay? And they used to use this as a way to smear conservatives whom they claim they would get the two mixed up, right? They swore up and down. Sex just referred to male and female, right? AKA biology, right? Those words, male and female, are reserved for biology, okay? And the terms man and woman or boy and girl, they are gender terms, okay? They used to say this as a way to smear conservatives as dumb and stupid and not understanding what the definitions of words are or the difference between sex and gender. And conservatives the whole time were like, no, we're not playing this game. Sex and gender are the same thing, right? There is no difference between sex and gender. Lo and behold, the left, because they know they've lost this argument, they're basically now changing the definition of female to include gender identity, basically acknowledging that conservatives were correct the whole time, right, about sex and gender being the same thing. And they're just saying, well, you know what? We'll just change the definition of female to include gender, and, you know, you can change your gender identity according to them. So therefore, trans women are actually females, right? They're actually real women, right? That's where they're trying to go with this, okay? That is where they're trying to go, okay? So that being said, this is some crazy stuff. However, what's even crazier and scary is when the government is doing this, as the Biden administration is in recession denial. Okay, as on Thursday, we're going to have a lot of economic numbers to evaluate, including GDP growth or lack thereof for the last quarter. And by definition, right, the traditional definition of recession, if you get 2 consecutive quarters of GDP declining, then you're in a recession. Now, the first quarter, we had a decline in GDP growth. So technically, if we get another decline in GDP growth for the second quarter, then we're in a recession. And the Biden administration is scared. They are absolutely scared. They are panicking over officially being in a recession, because if we are officially in a recession, Biden cannot come out here and piss on our legs and tell us it's raining when it comes to the economy anymore, right? Like they've been doing the whole time, telling us that the economy is great, you know, inflation is transitory, et cetera, okay? You can't have any of that anymore if we're officially in a recession. So again, these guys are panicking. And just like when it comes to the definition of female, right, when the left can't get their way, when they can't win the argument, right, when they're clearly going to lose on something, instead of just acknowledging the L, right, that they're about to take, they just change the definition of the word, right? And that is what the White House is trying to do, which, again, I find to be very, very, very scary stuff, that this is what the government is trying to do. So with that being said, let's roll the clip of the Biden administration scrambling desperately to either deny that we're about to go in a recession or to try to change the definition of recession just in case we actually do have a decline in GDP growth for the second quarter, to say, well, we're not actually really in a recession. Take a look.
And Mr. President, we're getting GDP numbers on Thursday. How worried should Americans be that we could be in a recession?
We're not going to be in a recession, in my view. The employment rate is still one of the lowest we've had in history. It's in the 3.6 area. We still find ourselves with people investing. My hope is we go from this rapid growth to steady growth. And so we'll see some coming down. But I don't think we're going to, God willing, I don't think we're going to see a recession.
And what is exactly the White House's definition of a recession?
Again, I'm not going to define it from here. I'm just going to leave it to the NBER, as we have stated, of how they define recession.
You won't declare it one until they have declared it one.
I'm just saying that we're just not going to define it. We use the indicators that the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research, have used. We've mentioned that a few times.
What will be comments from some saying 2 quarters of negative growth in a row, that's a recession.
Right, and certainly in terms of the technical definition, it's not a recession. The technical definition considers a much broader spectrum of data points. But in practical terms, what matters to the American people is whether they have a little economic breathing room, they have more job opportunities, their wages are going up. That has been Joe Biden's focus since coming into office.
Armchair economist this week. There is a ton of data coming out this week. It's probably a fun week for an economist because we're going to have consumer confidence survey, the second quarter GDP numbers. We got the inflation numbers for June. Which is the indicator? What's the number you're most focused on that will give you a better indication of where this economy is headed?
Well, I look at all the data, and GDP will be closely watched. A common definition of recession is 2 negative quarters of GDP growth, or at least that's something that's been true in past recessions. When we've seen that, there has usually been a recession. And many economists expect second quarter GDP to be negative. First quarter GDP was negative. So we could see that happen, and that will be closely watched. But I do want to emphasize what a recession really means is a broad-based contraction in the economy. And even if that number is negative, we are not in a recession now. And I would warn that we should be not characterizing that as a recession.
I understand that, but you're splitting hairs. I mean, if the technical definition is 2 quarters of contraction, you're saying that's not a recession?
That's not the
No?
That's not the technical definition. There's an organization called the National Bureau of Economic Research that looks at a broad range of data in deciding whether or not there is a recession. And most of the data that they look at right now continues to be strong. I would be amazed if the NBER would declare this period to be a recession, even if it happens to have 2 quarters of negative growth. We've got a very strong labor market. When you're creating almost 400,000 jobs a month, that is not a recession.
Janet Yellin.
Wow, that is absolutely incredible, right? That's some scary stuff, man. When the government's like, hey, you know what? The common definition that we all agreed to define what a recession is, which is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, we're just going to toss it aside because we don't want to say that we're actually in a recession, right? Let's be careful. Let's actually just use this definition from this place, this institution that we trust, right? In fact, we're going into a recession because the White House has released a whole blog on trying to redefine what the word recession is. And the hilarious part about this, guys, is that for whatever reason, when Trump was in office and there was some talks of recession, which they were very brief because the economy was so strong under Trump, but when there were talks of a recession under Trump, the Biden administration's advisors, who weren't his advisors at the time, and Democrats had no issues with the commonly accepted definition of a recession. Take a look.
Can I ask about the economy? Because this economy is going pretty well. We have to, what? Why is that funny?
It is going well for now.
For now, right. That's my, thank you. That's my question. Is like, I feel like the bottom has to fall out at some point. And by the way, I'm hoping for it because I think one way you get rid of Trump is a crashing economy. Yeah. So please, bring on the recession.
Jared, you just described a 33% decline in GDP. That is the definition of a recession, my friend.
Well, the definition is really crossing zero, but I take your point. I mean, I think if people will feel a GDP GDP downshift from 3 to 2%. And that's the median forecast, by the way.
Thursday, that first reading of second quarter GDP, there's a possibility this is a negative number. 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth.
The definition of a recession is a decline in output for 2 consecutive quarters, or about 6 months.
A recession is just 2 consecutive quarters of economic decline.
When we talk about the possibility of a recession, what is a recession? A recession is 2 consecutive quarters.
2 consecutive quarters.
2 consecutive quarters. 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP.
Because as you know, it's 2 consecutive quarters of down GDP.
That signals it is actually a definition of a recession.
I mean, the most common definition of a recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth.
Even if we don't have 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, we might have 1 quarter of growth so deep that it's classified as a recession.
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say that the mainstream liberal media was flat out hoping that we would go into a recession, or officially go into a recession under Trump, because they wanted the man out of office, right? They wanted a reason to say that the economy was not strong. I mean, Bill Maher just flat out said it, okay, what the mainstream liberal media was thinking. So with that being said, don't let them fool you today, right? Because when we actually do officially go into a recession, and it looks like all signs point to that we are, because the Biden administration wouldn't be scrambling this hard to push propaganda if we weren't, right? If the numbers were actually going to be good on Thursday. So when we actually do officially go into a recession, don't let them gaslight you, right, into telling you that it's not, right? Don't let them tell you that water is not wet. And again, the mainstream liberal media and the Biden administration has a history of doing this, guys. Again, it reminds me of what they did when it came to the pandemic, right? How, all of a sudden, all the COVID deaths under Biden weren't all that big of a deal when they were a huge deal under Trump, right? Every death was on Trump, but under Biden, even though he had more deaths, right, and he had the vaccines as well too on top of that, something Trump didn't have, apparently that's not his fault, right? That's not a big deal, okay? So up until this point, guys, I want you to understand, the Democrats have changed the definition of the word woman. So we have what is a woman. They've changed the definition of the word coup. So we have what is a coup. They've changed the definition of the word assault rifle. So we have what is an assault rifle. And now they're changing the definition of the word recession. So we have what is a recession. It's almost like the Democrats change the definition of word when it doesn't fit their narrative, right? That's kind of what it seems like. I hope you guys are catching on to what's going on here. Scary stuff, because it is straight out of an authoritarian government's playbook. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.